Sumerians were the first to invent writing and new methods of farming. They used to grow barley, wheat, dates, apples, and grapes. And they discovered a plant that would eventually cause more pleasure and more suffering than any other plant in the entire history. They called it the plant of joy. Today we call it opium. In the early 1900s, William Osler, a famous physician and founder of Johns Hopkins Hospital, called opium a God's own medicine.
Over the last decade, more than millions of people have died from opium overdoses. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, used it to treat insomnia. Greek physician Galen used it to treat headaches, vertigo, deafness, and almost all kinds of diseases. It was an unknown physician named Diagoras who was the first to realize that many of his friends had become hopelessly addicted to the drug. He was the first person to argue against its use, declaring that it was better to suffer pain than to become addicted to opium. But no one took him seriously. Romans loved opium too, but they also understood that it could be a powerful poison. In 183 BC, Carthaginian general Hannibal used it to kill himself, and the Emperor Claudius' wife Agrippina used it to poison her 14-year-old stepson Britannicus so that her son Nero could become emperor.
In the 17th century, British-owned companies shipped thousands of pounds of opium from India to China, and this export had increased over time. About 3 million Chinese citizens were addicted, and in some regions nearly everyone was an addict. Chinese society was on the verge of collapse. In response, the Chinese government banned opium smoking and had to seize and destroy millions of pounds of British opium. In mid-19th century, China and Britain fought 2 opium wars. China lost both times. As a consequence, China had to open more ports for opium importation, pay Britain $21 million, and handed Hong Kong to British rule, which by treaty wasn't returned to China until 1997.
While the Chinese were smoking opium, Americans were drinking it. In the early 16th century, a Swiss alchemist and physician mixed opium with brandy and called it laudanum. European women used it not only for themselves but also gave it to their babies to help them sleep. Americans also embraced liquid opium. Louisa May Alcott, author of Little Women, and George Washington used laudanum. Mary Todd Lincoln was addicted to it. By the late 1800s, the number of addicts had increased up to 200,000, and out of them, 75% were women. Opium use in America surged after the California gold rush, as thousands of Chinese immigrants brought opium pipes. By the 1870s, opium dens became popular among actors, gamblers, and criminals. Addiction grew so severe that the American government banned the import of opium. But its pain-relieving properties were undeniable. No other drug could match it. Scientists were desperate to find a way to extract its pain-relieving properties.
In 1803, Friedrich Sürtner, a 21-year-old chemist apprentice, extracted the most active ingredient of opium and named it morphine. Sürtner never trained at university, never earned a degree, made his own lab and tested its effect on himself. Sürtner found that morphine was about 6 times more powerful than opium, causing almost immediate euphoria followed by depression and dependence. He himself became addicted to the drug. He also warned that he had created a monster, but his warning went unheard. By 1827, the German pharmaceutical company Merck began producing it in large quantities, and it was used to treat almost all diseases. One of the Scotland doctors, Alexander Wood, injected morphine directly into the bloodstream, and it became the first drug to be injected in the vein. Wood reasoned that if morphine were injected, then people would not become addicted to the drug. Almost every physician in the United States began instructing patients on how to inject morphine on their own. Later, Wood's wife died from morphine overdose, the first recorded patient to die from an injectable drug.
Was it possible to invent a pain-relieving medicine that has the power of opium but without any properties of addiction? In 1874, a London pharmacist, Alder Wright, boiled morphine with vinegar for hours, creating diacetyl morphine. However, when he fed it to his dog, the dog became hyperactive, ill, and nearly died. He got scared of what he discovered and published his findings, but they were ignored. After 21 years, Heinrich Dresser, a young chemistry professor, discovered Alder Wright's article. Dresser knew that by acetylating morphine, the drug could enter the brain more quickly. Therefore, much less morphine would be required for pain relief, and people would be much less likely to become addicted to the drug. Felix, a PhD student working under Dresser, had previously developed aspirin for treating fever and headaches, was later assigned to synthesize diacetyl morphine, a grey white powder. Dresser presented his findings to the German medical community, where he claimed that this grey white powder, diacetyl morphine, could treat colds, headaches, pneumonia, and TB. People at the conference gave him a standing ovation. Bayer launched their new drug, calling it heroin. People could take aspirin only through a physician's prescription, but heroin, which was believed to be much safer, could be purchased over the counter. Heroin was a symbol of care at that time.
It did not take long to realize that heroin was not what it was claimed to be. By 1902, at least a dozen cases of addiction and some infant deaths had been reported. By 1905, the evidence was overwhelming. Infants born to heroin-addicted mothers suffer severe withdrawal symptoms, and traces of heroin were also found in the breast milk. Ultimately, US had to pass the Heroin Act, making it illegal. By 1930, major distributors of heroin were mobsters like Meyer Lansky, Dutch Schultz, and Lex Diamond. Around that time, the Italian mafia began to dominate the trade, led by Charles Lucky Luciano, who established the French Connection. How the US stopped this drug smuggling is dramatized in 1971 French Connection movie. President Nixon declared an all-out war on drugs and ironically chose Elvis Presley as its public face. However, when Presley died in 1977, morphine and codeine was found in his blood. Presley wasn't the only celebrity to die due to drug overdose. Janis Joplin, John Belushi, Chris Farley, and Philip Hoffman all died from heroin overdoses.
Scientists had hoped that morphine could treat opium addiction. Then they had hoped that heroin could treat morphine addiction. It was time to try something else. Again, they tried to separate pain relief properties from the addiction, but they failed. This time in an extraordinary way. To find the next wonder drug, scientists turned to another component of opium, thebaine. They call it OxyContin. In the early 1950s, OxyContin made its American debut. The single most powerful, most addictive, and most abused preparation was OxyContin. It was a prescription painkiller that contains pure OxyContin without being mixed with other drugs. Purdue Pharma promoted this drug as a primary treatment for joint pain, and FDA approved it.
Purdue designed OxyContin with a special coating that made it release slowly over time. This was meant to give patients steady pain relief throughout the day, so they would not need to take multiple doses. However, people who became addicted to the drug figured out that if they chewed or crushed the tablets, they could destroy the slow-release coating and enjoy the immediate rush of OxyContin, exponentially greater than any other product in the market. In 1984, the US government passed the Compassionate Pain Relief Act in response to the hospice movement started by Cicely Saunders, legalizing the use of heroin for a dying patient so that they would not spend their final weeks in unbearable pain.
FDA made a critical mistake by approving Purdue Pharma's time-released version of OxyContin as a common painkiller based on findings of Russell Portnoy, a 31-year-old pain specialist. He claimed that long-term use of OxyContin is harmless and non-addictive. In 2001, Purdue Pharma earned around $1.5 billion from OxyContin sales, surpassing the retail revenue of any other branded pharmaceutical product. After 2 years, Jane Ballantyne published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine claiming that long-term use of drugs like OxyContin induced tolerance. Larger and larger doses of the drug were required to induce the same effect. Hyperesthesia, pain experienced while using painkillers, was actually worse than the original pain. Hormonal changes, specifically a decline in the production of cortisol, changes in the immune system. Eventually, the FDA issued its strongest warning, the so-called black box warning, but it was too late.
Over the past decade, millions of people have died due to painkiller overdose. OxyContin turned out to be one of the most addictive narcotics ever marketed. And Russell Portnoy's campaign against pain became one of the modern medicine's greatest mistakes. The lesson from the ill-fated war on pain is a simple one. It's all about the data. When Friedrich Sertner feared that in morphine he had opened up a Pandora box and let loose a monster, his warnings were ignored. When Heinrich Dresser claimed that heroin was safe, he had only tested it on a handful of people. And when Russell Portnoy launched a national campaign promoting opium-based drugs, his findings were based only on 38%. Don't forget to share and subscribe for more content like this. And again, thanks for watching.